Okay. Mr. Mayheart, would you mind giving me a little bit of background about your upbringing, where you're from, and your family?
Okay. Like I said before, my name is Michael Raymond Dardar Sr. The Mayheart, my father was Raymond Mayheart Dardar. And in the Indian community, he was Mayheart. And so we moved to Venice when I was really young. I was born in Golden Meadow. Uh, when I was, I guess, about 3 or 4 years old, it was about the time we moved. And all our trips we would make back to Golden Meadow when I was a kid, all the community members would call me T. Mayheart, Little Mayheart. And so when I started writing, my dad had passed away, and I wanted to do something to honor him. And so all of my writings, I write as T. Mayheart, and to honor him.
That's beautiful. I love that.
So like I said, I was born in Golden Meadow in 1962. We stayed there till I was about 3, when we moved to Venice. And I, I lived in Venice, in the Venice Bluefield area, for about 41 years till Hurricane Katrina. We lost our home in Katrina, and we moved back to Lafourche Parish, and so now I live in Raceland.
Okay. And when you were growing up in Venice, what was it like?
Uh, Venice is well, really all southern Plaquemines Parish is an interesting place. It's a multicultural community. There's of course, a small Houma settlement that's been there since I was a kid. Well, since before I was a kid. Um, there's an African American community, a white community. In Since I was in school, and probably in the mid 70s, early 80s, there was the beginnings of a Vietnamese and a Cambodian community that's grown since then. There's a Yugoslavian community there that's been there for a few generations. But it's a very interesting place. A lot of diverse communities. I was fortunate enough to work with a lot of people from a lot of different ethnic backgrounds, and so uh, up until Katrina, it was home. I really enjoyed growing up down there. Since then, it's changed dramatically. Since Katrina, so many people have moved out. I go back down there every week, a couple of days a week for work, and it's unfortunately not the same place anymore.
Do you find that prior to Katrina and when you were growing up, was French a part of your everyday?
Was what part of my life?
French?
Uh, it's a strange situation down there because it's not spoken throughout the community. You hear it from the elders in the homeless settlement, but it wasn't a part of my everyday reality. And so, and plus, I was that first generation that went to public school, and so the push was for English, so I could succeed. And so I grew up understanding to a degree what my elders were saying, but not really being conversant in French.
So it was something that maybe you would listen to at home, but outside of that, it wasn't a part of your everyday.
Yeah, that was it. Because my mother was white and she didn't speak French. So it was just when I was with my dad, when he was around his brothers and his cousins that lived in the community, that I would hear the language, or when we would come back to Golden Meadow to visit. But on a daily basis during the day, it wasn't something I heard a lot.
When you were in school, what was your experience like as a member of the Houma Nation? Did you have a sense of identity and belonging, or did you feel like you were just a member of the community, the general, broad, diverse community? What was your sense of identity growing up as a young man?
I think it was when I was really young. I mean, I always understood that we were Indian. I mean, my dad uh, never really talked about it like it was something out of the ordinary. I mean, it was just us, it was who we were. And so he was a commercial fisherman and a trapper. And so I grew up in what essentially was a traditional Houma lifestyle, but I didn't see it as anything out of the ordinary. It was just who we were.
Hmm.
And then I lived in a community where uh, people from other groups had the same types of occupations, and so um, it I guess the identity didn't really stand out that much. You know, we I would I could remember as a little kid, people would question me, you know, hey, are you Spanish, or you know, are you this or that? but it really wasn't something that I gave a lot of deep thought to. I don't think when I was younger.
Thank you for sharing about that. I guess kind of transitioning into adulthood, can you tell me a little bit about your professional career and your interest as an adult? And if any way at all, if how that ties back to your upbringing.
Well, like I said, I was part of that first generation in the tribe that got a high school education, but from there, I went to work. I got married really young. I was 17. My wife and I, my wife and I met uh, probably our junior year in high school. Uh,
Wow.
we we married the summer of our junior year. She surprisingly, she wasn't pregnant. I mean, it was. I guess it's because we both grew up in an old-fashioned household. You know, in the old days when people got married really young, our parents didn't think it was that out of the ordinary, uh, and so we got married the summer of our junior year. We finished our senior year in high school together, married, and then uh, she got pregnant a couple months after we had gotten married. And so our daughter was born the week we graduated from high school. And so,
Wow, that's so much so fast.
and it's and I realize it's not an ordinary story, and I haven't, and over the years I haven't met probably haven't met another couple at that age that I would say, yeah, you guys should get married. It was, but like I said, I think we were both old souls who grew up in old families, and it for us it was just right. And I mean, we've been married for 41 years now, so it's worked out. But we had two children, a daughter first, and then 2 years later a son, and so now I have, and from them now I have a total of seven grandchildren. And so
Wow.
it's kind of, it kind of gave me a jump start on life though, because I'm on, I consider it, I'm only 58, fifthing to be 59, and my oldest grandchild is 21. So I'm happy that I'm sure I'm going to live to see several of my great grandchildren. So in that aspect, I really, now that I've gotten older, I really appreciate that what the math has given me.
Yeah.
And so I went to work. Like I said, as a kid, I grew up trawling and trapping with my dad. After I got married, he offered me the Lafitskis if I wanted to continue trawling. I told him no. Uh, so I did a little short stint in the Army, and then went on to a variety of careers. I my wife jokes that I have a 5-year bug. I'd work for a place for 5 years and go find something else to do. And so I've been all sorts of, I've been a tankerman and a crane operator, and I'm a diesel mechanic, which is what I do now. Even before COVID, I kind of cut back to about 4 days a week. And so kind of looking forward to retirement, at least from that part of my life. The other parts that keep me busy will be enough to keep me occupied from here on out.
Well, how about writing? How did you come about to be interested in writing?
Writing kind of, uh, I always enjoyed it. I had a really good history teacher in high school. I mean, not school, not history, English teacher, Mr. Carl. And he always encouraged me to write. I would write little fiction stories for his class. I've always been an avid reader. And so that kind of continued with it, with the, always had a deep interest in history. And so that kind of continued. And then in 94, I got on the tribal council. And my work with the tribal council, I got involved with the federal recognition effort and all of those things. And it just bothered me that other people were telling our story. Felt like we needed to be able to tell our own story. And of course, I had no formal training or anything like that, but I I just saw the need and just started writing. And so eventually I put together a little short history book, Women Chiefs and Crawfish Warriors, and that we self-published that one, I think around 2000. And then I had a collection of little short historical essays I had written about the tribe, about the French language in the tribe and those sorts of things and the culture. And we put those together and put together a booklet. We had a grant to get it published. That was Point Whiskey. And that was more, I felt like it, to give the tribe a history book, some educational material, excuse me. And then it kind of went from there. I began to write more and more about indigenous issues back in, I think it was 2009, maybe. The tribe sent me to Alaska to this indigenous conference. I met a lot of indigenous leaders and activists from around the world, from Kenya to Alaska to Mongolia to all sorts of places. And it was a really enlightening experience for me. And so when I got back from that, I began to write more and more about indigenous issues, and I began to put them together. And I had a friend I had made, Clint Bruce, who had done the French translation for Women Chiefs and Crawfish Warriors, who had just so happened that around the same time contacted me. He was still at Centenary, and they were interested. They had their own publishing house, and they were interested in putting together something, because they're most what they do is republished old French texts having to do with Louisiana and Louisiana history, and they were interested in putting something together contemporary. And so we began to work together with my essays and Clint translating them. Got Steve Williams to do some artwork, and we put out Istruma, which is my first actual published book. And then since then, I've had an opportunity to contribute to some different works. I did a piece on Hurricane Katrina, and I did a couple others on some indigenous issues for a couple of other volumes. But it's just kind of been a journey. I never really had a plan to write. Still don't really have one. It just kind of these opportunities open up, and a lot of this. I haven't written hardly anything about history or culture in quite a while. I've stuck mostly to political issues, that sort of thing. And for me, it's almost like therapy. The world's going through all of this craziness, and I see it in certain ways, and I feel compelled to write it down. And so there's a website called Dissonant Voice that thankfully has published a few of my essays, and so that's kind of where my writing is now. It's just more therapeutic than anything, I believe.
Well, it sounds like getting on the tribal council in 1994 kind of prompted your interest in writing and exploring these issues further, what was the thing that pushed you to join the tribal council?
Well, my aunt Helen Gindrat had been part of uh, the tribe's political efforts since the late '60s. She went, her and her, well, going back a little bit, Frank Knockham was a tribal leader down in Golden Meadow, late '60s into the early '70s. He heard about this meeting in Chicago that the Indian tribes, mostly from the east and the southeast, were getting together. This was prior to the the bureaucratic effort to put together a method of gaining federal recognition. And so he was important. He realized it was important that the tribe send someone there to see what was going on. And so he mortgaged his house, put the money together, sent my Aunt Helen and his, I think his daughter, to Chicago, and they came back, and that was kind of the beginning of the political movement for the tribe in Lafourche Parish. And then from there, the two groups were formed: the one in Terrebonne and the one in Lafourche. I think I get them confused. One was the Houma tribe, one was the Houma Alliance. And then they merged in 1979 to form the United Houma Nation. And so my aunt was involved in all of that. And then around 93, 94, she stepped back from the tribal council. Excuse me. And so I kind of felt like it was a family obligation. You know, I felt like somebody had to step up to take her place. And so I ended up coming on board the council in 94 and stayed there for 16 years.
Goodness gracious, that's a long time. Thank you. Thank you for the work that you did. Well, I'm just curious to know, you've done so much to give back to our tribe, and I'd like to know more about what your hopes and dreams are for future generations in our tribe. In a recent article that you published on your blog, you discuss the devaluation of human life as a consequence of capitalism's obsession with the material. And I'm curious to know, do you find there's a parallel that exists with the fossil fuel companies and their continued economic exploitation of resources in southern Louisiana? And if you could then kind of frame that in terms of our tribe's future and our relationship to the land.
Well, I mean, it's always been the case as long as I can remember, and even, you know, before my lifetime, the hold that the fossil fuel industry has on South Louisiana. I did I did some writing and talking and studying on this subject for a long time when I was on the council, and then afterwards. And in my research, I found that, like in the '90s, Louisiana's been redistricted since then, but in the '90s, Terrebonne and Lafourche were part of a combined congressional district. You know, since then, gerrymandering has cut it all up. You know, with the Republicans trying to maintain their power base. But back then, it was a combined district, and there's a United Nations index that measures that uses, and it's been a long time since I looked at this, but if I'm going from memory, that uses a lot of different parameters to measure, you know, more than just GDP, to measure the health of communities, and those studies were done not only with nations, but they broke it down with the United States, and they did it state to state, and you look at those, and it looked at the congressional districts, and for all of the money and wealth that continues to be taken out by the fossil fuel industry from our homeland, I think we ranked in the bottom 10% on this development index in the United States measuring the congressional districts, because the wealth doesn't get returned to the land or the people of the land. It goes out. It always did. But yet at the same time, where the the tribal citizens are caught in this same paradox that uh, as the land's destroyed, as the commercial fishing industry is getting worse and worse, as the trapping industry went away when I was young, it was gone by the 90s. Uh, there is no way to make a living for the most part in South Louisiana unless you're in some way, shape, or form working in that same oil industry. And so and so we're caught in that paradox. But what I'm seeing is, for and it's hard to see here in South Louisiana, but when you step back and you look around the world, you see that industry is shrinking globally. More and more countries, especially in Western Europe, are moving towards alternative forms of energy. I just read a couple of days ago where a major financial corporation that was the major backer of the fossil fuel industry in Australia is divesting itself from fossil fuel. France, a couple of days ago, announced their multi-trillion-dollar plan to get them out of the mess that's created, the economic mess that's been created by the coronavirus. And in that plan is a major investment in alternative energy and green energy and those types of efforts. So the world is moving beyond fossil fuel. But here in the United States, and especially here in Louisiana, we're still locked into it. And so what we're going to have, what we need to look for, because we're not getting it from a federal level, is I would hope, as the tribe, I'm not involved in tribal politics anymore, but I would hope that the tribe would look to methods of providing a just transition. We've got to find training in industry for our people to break free of this bondage to fossil fuel, or we're going to go down with it.
That makes total sense. Looking into the future and trying to plan ahead, that is taking into account kind of the global shift that's occurring that you described, and taking that down to the local level. What does that look like, and what opportunities will be available for the next generation? I think all those things are really important and should definitely be part of the discussion. Well, you also mentioned that you had traveled to Alaska and you'd met with some other tribes, and I'm curious to know if you found any commonalities with just global indigenous struggles that perhaps other tribes share, and that we can kind of relate and unite our efforts together.
Oh, that was always an enlightening experience, not only there, but when the BP spill took place, we had a delegation that came in from, I believe, Ecuador. And I was able to take. They had basically booked a trip, but they wanted a local representative from the indigenous tribes to kind of be their guide. So I went with them, and we met in Belle Chase. We caught a seaplane. We flew over the mouth of the river around where I grew up at. Seeing the effects of the spill from there, and then we came back up, landed in Bluefield, and then caught a boat, and then took the boat down to see it at water level on what was going on, and then we had a series of meetings with them afterwards. And so those kinds of experiences, as well as my trip to Alaska, there's been other delegations have come in. you begin to see that it's the same battle. It's even the same enemies. You know, the tribes in Ecuador are fighting the pollution left over from oil exploration in their country by the very same corporations that have been here since the 1930s. And so not only we're fighting the same battles, we're fighting the same enemy. And and so there's nothing but commonality in our positions and in our struggles. And so it was very easy to converse with the activists and the leaders from all these other communities, because we understand each other. We've seen the same things. We're dealing with the same things.
Well, in facing that common enemy and kind of uniting forces, what can the next generation of leadership from the Houma do to not only face these common enemies, but also at the same time be working to preserve history, culture, and tradition?
Well, I think the impetus needs to be that this next generation of leaders needs a clear and consistent vision for where the tribe is going in this new century. We've we've had all these, we've had over a century of struggle against unrestrained capitalism, basically, and its effects that we're living with, from coastal erosion to pollution, and to climate change and global tidal rise, and all these things are unfortunately going to be the reality of the 21st century. So we need a vision for where we're going, what's going to be our path through these difficulties, understanding that we're not the same people that we were when the French met us in 1700, when we were in the Felicianas. And we're not the same people that we were at the end of the 18th century, when we were living in the backlands of these plantations on the river up near Donaldsonville. We're not even the same people that we were at the beginning of the 20th century, when we were in these isolated communities in the lower bayous, and there were no roads, and our only means of transportation from one community to another was by water. We're a different people now. We have that common history. We have that common culture. We need to use that and rely on that as our foundation. But as we go forward into this new century, we need a new vision. And it's not for, it's surely not for me to say what that vision is. It's something that needs to be grounded in the community, in the collective. And the danger is, we have a nation of roughly 18,000, north of 18,000 citizens. The reality is they don't all see this. There's a large portion of them that have grown comfortable in being assimilated into the world as it exists outside of the Indian community. And so they nominally acknowledge their Indian identity, but they're not committed or part of a tribal future. I mean, if that's the correct terminology. And so the vision for the future of the Houma nation going into the 21st century is realistically not going to be the vision of 18,000 people, but it's whatever percentage it's going to be. They have to coalesce around whatever that path is, and they have to pursue it. I don't have all the answers, but I I can see the problems and the issues that we confront. And I know that I have a confidence that we're going to make it. I've got these 7 grandchildren. Like I said, the oldest is 21, the youngest is 2. Uh, and I know even when that youngest is going to be older, there's going to be a Houma nation. I don't know what form it's going to be in. I don't know what direction they're going to be going in, but I'm confident that it's still going to be here. We've been through a lot in our history. We've had some. We've been through this type of situation before, where our lifestyle completely changed. When we were at Bayou Cane at the beginning of the 19th century, we had come off the river. We had settled near what today is Houma, and then because the population around Houma grew as we went on into the early 1800s, we were pushed into those lower bayou communities. We no longer had the large fields and the huge principal villages. We transitioned into family-based settlements on the different bayous. And that stuck with us. That's why you talk about your family being from Dulac and mine from Golden Meadow. Every time you meet a Houma, they talk about the bayou they grew up on, and even if they didn't, even if it was their parents who grew up on that bayou, they have a link to that as their place of origin. And so that was a dramatic change for us. We went from being predominantly farmers to almost a hunter-gatherer type existence in the early 1800s in those smaller bayou communities, and began to rely more on hunting and fishing, and smaller gardens and smaller fields. And so we've been here before with these drastic changes in lifestyle, and I think that's where we're at now. And so the onus is on us as a people to find our way through this again.
Well, it sounds like you're very hopeful that we will continue to be adaptive and kind of redefine ourselves and continue to persevere through adversity and things that are thrown our way consistently. What role, if any, does federal recognition play in your vision of our shared future?
I don't really know. Federal recognition has kind of been the holy grail since the petition was put in the late 70s, early 80s. It's taken a lot of the tribe's resources. It's been a very contentious thing. It's the reason why there are splinter groups now is because of the federal recognition effort and its failings. I'm not saying, it's still important. I'm not saying it's not important, but I think it's critical that in this vision for the future, this vision for the 21st century, we need to imagine making it without federal recognition. If federal recognition comes, if we're successful in the end, then that's great. It'll be a lot more resources that we can tap into, but we need to really imagine a future without it.
So kind of not make that the primary objective, and focus our energy in creating a new vision for the future that may or may not incorporate federal recognition.
Well, we have to understand the reason it's been such a contentious issue is because it's at its root, it's not a fair system. It's not a fair process. It never was. We went into it, they told us in the beginning it was going to be an 18-month to 24-month process. You submit the proper documentation, and then you see if you meet this set of 7 criteria. And all of it was a facade. it's because it hid the politics behind the bureaucracy. And so one of the trips I made to Washington while I was on the council, Brenda was principal chief then, I was vice principal chief. We sat in the office of Loretta Toole, who was at the time, I forget what her title was. She was a deputy assistant director or something of some sort. And we, of course, had a lot of questions. This was, I think this was after the proposed findings and before we issued our rebuttal. So this would have been around 95. And one of the issues that we had, and we still have, was their acceptance of particular pieces of evidence. And the question specifically, I think I was asking her, we had to deal with the work of John Swanton and why his work was accepted in other petitions, but rejected in ours. And I remember the meeting probably forever, but she looked at me and said with a straight face that I think her exact words were, every petition is contained within the four corners of the document, which is kind of bureaucratic speak to say that we make the rules as we want to for every petition, and we're not obligated to follow them from petition to petition. So it never was a fair process.
That must have been so frustrating to sit there and feel so disempowered to be able to hold them accountable for their decision and the way that they interpreted the evidence that you submitted.
Yeah, there's no recourse. You know, we submitted a rebuttal to, well, we got the negative proposed findings in 94, the year I got on the council. We submitted a rebuttal to that in 96. And as far as I know, and I've been off the council for 4 years now, as far as I know, we've never had an official response to the rebuttal yet.
Wow. Wow. That's a long time.
Yeah, my math is terrible, but I think that's like 24 years.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, it's clearly not a priority. That's apparent. No. Goodness gracious. Well, thank you for all the work that you did do to help lobby and get a decision in that case. We're at where we're at, and it's inconclusive, but we wouldn't even have made it this far in the process if you hadn't put in that work when you did. So thank you for that.
It's been believe me, it's been a collective effort. A lot of people in a lot of years. A lot of those that came before me and those that came after me and that are still working. It has absorbed a lot of the tribe's resources and energy for, well, probably since they first started doing research for it, which would have been around 1978.
Goodness gracious. Well, hopefully we get a decision at some point, or at least we decide what direction we want to take as a tribe. And so, you know, not dependent on the government's decision, we'll have kind of our own vision for the future.
Right.
Well, just to kind of wrap things up, I would like to know if someone's interested in reading your work, where can they go to see the things that you've published in your writing?
The Estruma book is still available through, it was available on Amazon, but not any longer. You have to go through Centenary's publishing house, Le Centenaire. They have a website. I don't have it in front of me, but if you, I guess the easiest way is to Google Centenary College in Shreveport, and then there should be a link on there to their publishing house.
Okay.
The other books were published by the tribe, and so they're not in publication anymore. I'm been working with Donnie Verdon and I'm hopeful to get back with them maybe after this COVID situation gets us in a better position. Uh, what I want to do is take the Struma book um, and put it into a PDF format. What I'm and in fact it'll probably it's going to involve the language group, because in when I wrote Struma, we were working with Nick Ferraklis in research on the Houma French language. And so the language section in the Struma book has to do with that. So I had talked to Donnie about possibly him and I collaborating, and we can redo the language section and put in the information, or some of the information about the work you guys have been doing, and put it into a PDF format, and then have it available for download. You know, I mean, just as a tool. And so hopefully, sometime in the near future, we can do that.
That would be fabulous. Yeah, to just make it more accessible to the public.
And that was its purpose in the beginning when we first got it published with the grant we had gotten after Katrina. We gave away all the copies. So that was what it was for. You know, we had the powwow in Houma. We had boxes of copies there. We made it available, gave it to everybody that wanted a copy, and that was its purpose, just to kind of get a general history of the tribe, someplace for, if for tribal citizens that they're interested, someplace to start. And so hopefully we can continue that and get it into a PDF format where it can be available.
Wonderful. Well, we'll look out for that from you. Thank you again for making time today for this interview. I really appreciate you telling us a little bit about yourself and your background, and also about the work that you've done on behalf of the tribe. So thank you very much for this interview and for making time to talk.
Oh, it's not a problem. Always available.
Okay. Well, have a good rest of your afternoon.
You too.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.